Hello, you're watching Global Insight, where we speak to experts from around the world on issues making headlines. The global population reached a milestone 8 billion on the 15th of November, signalling major improvements in public health that have lowered the risk of dying and increased life expectancy. And the figure has more than doubled from 6 or 7 decades ago, when the world population was estimated at around 3 billion people, according to the UN Population Fund. But has the quality of life grown on par with population growth? Now, in countries like South Korea, Japan, the United States and European nations, there are likely to be fewer people in the decades to come. And one of the biggest reasons has been low birth rates, as more and more young people are foregoing having children. And in particular, Millennials and Gen Zs, they're expected to be rather unhappy and have fewer opportunities compared to their parents' generation. And well, we discussed these demographic trends and what needs to be done to make the future a more hopeful one for all people around the world. For this, we're joined by Syeda Zakir Hussain, Associate Professor of Medicine and Health at the University of Sydney, and Hwang Myung-jin, Professor of Social Welfare at Korea University, also Vice President of Korea Population Society. Very warm welcome to you both. Thank you so much for joining us. And well, we want to begin with you, Professor Hussain. Now, the UN's recent annual report on global population, it showed that the number of people in the world grew at the slowest pace since 2015, in 50 years, rather. What has really led to this severe shrinkage, particularly last year, and what has really been the impact of the global health crisis in particular?
Thank you very much for this question, and thanks for inviting me to this session. Yes, the question is very important, thinking about the shrinking of our world population. And that is, we can see some of these countries have the life expectancy and the number of births that has been declined, and the generation, like we call it, replacement level, that has below replacement level. Many of these things happens due to improvement in, we look at both from economic perspective, from social perspective. If you look at from economic perspective, it's more women are working and have a different style of life, so less likely to have children. And so there we see that fertility rate has gone down, and also see that infant mortality, many, the countries we are talking here are basically more developed countries, where we see that life expectancy is up and number of children has gone down, and also the replacement level, below replacement level. Economic situation is also important. Urbanization and industrial development, all these are contributing to those factors. And what you mentioned about the millennium and the Generation Z, so they are experiencing some experience of these sort of changes in their lifetime.
Professor Hussain, another question that I want to ask you is, well, the UN, it projected that over half of the estimated increase in the world's population will be concentrated in 8 countries, and most of them are located in Southeast Asia and Africa. And well, what major shifts do you expect then to take place across the globe as a result of this demographic change?
I think many important factors that we need to look at. Some of these Asian countries are rapid change in the lifestyle, also development and other factors that contributing to improvement in life. And also we see that maternal mortality has gone down in many of these countries, and also infant mortality gone down. So we also see that some impacts is happening. But one thing is quite clear, that the impact is in developed countries and impacts on the developing countries are not the same. But developing countries are nowadays experiencing aging population. So they're experiencing quite a few things. One hand, they have the chronic diseases that is happening now, but they also have mostly infectious diseases. So they're having double burden of disease. So we're looking at some of those impacts on these countries, like those countries we are talking here.
Right, so we need to pay a lot more attention to just how we're seeing population growth as well, not just the quantity, but also the quality of the services that will be rolled out with the population as well. And now looking at the situation here in South Korea, Professor Hwang, we've heard for quite some years, quite many years, that South Korea is facing a demographic crisis of its own, and that really threatens our economic productivity. And well, we're already seeing schools close down, classrooms just shrinking, student numbers dwindling. When and how will South Korea start really feeling the impact of its declining population across its entire economy?
World global population has increases much faster than we expected. It's also the same on the opposite side as developed countries shrinking their population. When the population size is declining, that the first impact is the economic productivity, the labor shortage, and the consumer market shrinkage, and that there are less and fewer jobs available. And another thing is there's not much resources to support the senior people, considering that we are increasing number of senior people in the future. These are all combined, threatening the risk of stabilization of the economy and society at large.
Professor Huang, well, it's quite concerning, really, because looking ahead, you're supposed to live for the future and have hopes for the future. But the kind of future that millennials and Gen Zs are looking at, it's a rather pessimistic picture, especially compared to their parents' generations, when there are a lot more economic opportunities, job opportunities. But, well, they're looking at this future where social burden, the costs of social services are also going to increase. But at the same time, right now, there's a lack of sufficient jobs and the cost of living crisis as well, of course. So really looking ahead, how should social spending and infrastructure really prepare for an aged population?
Oh, you're right. The younger generation, we call it MZ generation, which is quite unique because the rest of the country do not really mention this MZ, just the millennials. These people are in the future, they're already, some of them already in their 30s. They have no resources to get married and thus make their own children. They're poorer than their parent generation. They tend to have jobless or having the low quality jobs. Therefore, their economic status depending on their parent asset and giving out, and sometimes luck. So these people in the younger generation, they feel themselves and in the future is gloomy and foggy. That are the main concern of society. Maybe they can handle themselves because they are pretty much well educated, and then they are the first generation who use mobile devices very well. But also they are the ones who will support their children and their parent generation. I believe that they are neither capable or neither the willing to support their parent generation. So the government spending is well designed to support the senior people while supporting the education and the preparation and training, job training for the MZ generation for this transition of the industrial, the market and the trend.
I see. Professor Hussein, I wonder how you see this just impending demographic crisis, it seems, especially for millennials and Gen Zs who really are looking at this, as Professor Huang just said, a rather bleak future. What impact are their socio-economic conditions having on them, and what should be done to support them?
Thanks. Actually, this is very important point because we are living here few families with few generations, and we can see that aging population is happening with that. And Professor Hung mentioned quite nicely that these young people are more, not that greater in terms of the economic solvency and other things that their parents were used to have. They are facing more challenges with the job insecurity, finding job stability, education, and so many more. And they have no capacity to support themselves. And on the other hand, in some cases, we see that they are also supported to the parents. So in this way, if we look at that, the socioeconomic situation, if government needs to help this generation, there must be some areas that is more important to look at so that they are not dependent on the government resources. For example, mental health issues, that's been quite important. And if we look at the mental health issues, seeing the psychiatrists, they are more likely to see them than their previous generation. So government should make an effort to make sure that young people's mental health, the reason why they are with the mental health situation, that is planned and that supports are there, and they're not moving into that psychological stress or distress. So if we see that job security and other social supports are available to them, and if they can get those sort of supports, that can help them to have better quality of life and not using the resources for supporting their mental health, other health situation as well.
Right, and of course mental health's been a very important discussion here in South Korea as well, as young people in particular, they deal with many forms of inequality in Korean society. And Professor Hwang, how should South Korea really target inequality? What kind of inequalities are young Koreans faced with, and what are some long-term measures that are really needed to make young people feel secure enough to just have hope and also have children?
Demographic perspective, we have to think about the relevant size of population. Population shrinking itself is not the problem, but the thing is that our social and economic stability has to be designed for optimal the conditions, reaching a certain size of population. The Japanese government decided that 100 million people is the optimal size of the population for their economic status. Just likewise, Korea, from my understanding, my research is 42 million population is the number of the size of the population that we can optimize our productivity and economic development, and as well as social development. I can agree more on what Dr. Hussein just said. Quality of population is important. The first thing is we have to provide the human capital investment, which is education. But at the same time, we have not much paid attention to the younger generation, how to live happy on their own lives. Mental health, emotional, and spiritual well-being are very important. Recent trend in Korea, the parents of young children, they are paying attention to their children's mental health, and Dr. Oh Young is one example why she's so popular, because we tend to switch our concern just educating them intellectually, but also sustain their own lives, how to live themselves happy. That is how we switches our human capital investment from the size of population to the quality of population.
Right, so not just living up to numbers, but living as human beings, that's something that's very much needed. And Professor Hussein, how should governments prepare for an aged population from a healthcare perspective?
I think this is coming. It's not a recent issue. It has been there. And many countries, as I mentioned at the beginning, like aging population is not only an issue for developed countries. It is becoming an issue, and more elderly people will be living in developing countries as well. So government preparation for looking after these people, and that is to make sure like we have health expectancy. It's not that number of years that people are living longer, they are living healthier. So we all talk about the health expectancy, not life expectancy. If those who are living in 83 years old, and if they are living with disability or with health problems, that will incur a lot of health expenditure for the government. So it is important for the government to make sure that health expectancy, like people can maintain good health, and the environment is there, infrastructure is there, food security is there. So we need to look at all those to think about how we can have a healthy aging population. And also for those who are like generation M and G, they will be aging soon. So if we have a program to entail them, to motivate them living healthy life, that can help government to reduce the expenses on health elderly people. Also the infrastructure is, I think other thing I also have to mention that mental health is again an issue for the elderly population. A lot of people feel lonely, isolated, and that actually causes a lot of mental health issues. And government should find out the ways so that these people can have a networking, social grouping, and other means so that they are not lonely and they have a good health situation, mental health, both physical health as well.
Right, on going forward, I think it's really important to really just change the question as well, as you just did, Professor Hussain, from are we living longer to are we living healthier? So even just reframing the question and changing our perspective, I think it's so very much needed ahead of all these demographic challenges that we face. Well, thank you very much, Saeeda Zakia Hussain, Associate Professor of Medicine and Health at the University of Sydney, and Hwang Myung-jin, Professor at Korea University. It was a pleasure to have you on our show. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Good days.
And also thank you very much to our viewers for tuning in. Global Insight will be back on Thursday, South Korea time. Do tune in then. Bye-bye.